Hi guys, and welcome to Terminal Velocity. Today I'm going to be talking about my top 10 Zelda games. And while I did do one last year, my opinions on Zelda have changed a lot since the last year, so I decided to make another list. Number 10. The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. And while all the versions of this game are fun, the version that got this game on the list is the 2019 Switch remake because it looks graphically really nice and it's a very enjoyable game, and it even comes with a dungeon builder. And speaking of the dungeons, this game has some of the best 2D dungeons in the entire series. There are tons of great dungeons with Eagle's Tower, Turtle Rock, Face Shrine, and a lot of other great dungeons. This game also has a really good story, and it has great characters, and it's just really fun to play. Even if you've already played it before on the Game Boy Color, I'd recommend the Switch version. Number 9. The Legend of Zelda: Oracle of Ages. In the last Zelda Top 10 video I did, Oracle of Ages and Seasons were combined, but in this game, I considered them different games. And the Oracle of Ages is one of my favorite 2D Zelda games, and also, I think it's probably the most underrated Zelda game, as it has amazing dungeons and good stories, and just in general, it's a fun game to play, despite being a Game Boy Color game from 2001. Just overall, this game has a lot of interesting gimmicks, as well as, it's basically 2D Ocarina of Time at some points. There are a lot of references to that game, and it's all really great, and I would definitely recommend it. Number 8. The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds. The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds is essentially the successor to A Link to the Past. While it shares the same overworld and essentially the same dark world, it has fairly different dungeons, and it's a very fun game to play. And while I would not consider it as great as the original, there are plenty of things that make it stand out from A Link to the Past and make it enjoyable, such as having much better graphics, and in some cases, the story progresses better. Also, this game has a really great story, which leans very heavily into the dark world and is very similar to A Link to the Past. Just in general, this game is really fun. Number 7. The Legend of Zelda: The Minish Cap. The Minish Cap is one of the more unique Zelda games, as it doesn't have the normal boss, Ganondorf, and instead has the Wind Mage Vati, who has taken over Hyrule. And unlike most other Zelda games, this game, as well as the Oracle games, were made by Capcom, which is a different studio from Nintendo. This game has really good dungeons and items, and has very interesting new aspects, as you can shrink into the size of a Minish, and that allows you to do different things and experience the world a completely new way. For example, at one point, the dungeon boss is a Choo-Choo, which would normally be a very easy enemy, but since you're so small, it makes it much more interesting and difficult. Number 6. The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time is the highest rated video game of all time, and it's obvious to see why. This game has two versions, the 3DS version and the N64 version, and they're both really fun to play, although I prefer the 3DS version slightly more, just because of it looks aesthetically better, and it's a little more easier to use and figure out. But this game has amazing dungeons, great music, and an overall very good story. well, it's held back at some points for being uh, slightly boring and hard to figure out at some points. It's still a very, very fun game, and I would definitely recommend it to basically anyone, because it's just a great game. Number 5. The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past is probably my favorite 2D Zelda game, as it combines great dungeons, great story, and as well as amazing items, and a really interesting overworld, and great boss fights. There's just a lot of great things about this game. And while it is slightly difficult at some points, and it is longer than most Zelda games, it's still very fun and enjoyable. And I would definitely recommend it for any person who likes puzzle, action, adventure games. It's just really fun in general. Number 4. The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask. Majora's Mask is one of the most unique and interesting Zelda games out there. Compared to Ocarina of Time, it's fairly similar, but the entire game you're Child Link, and you use different transformation masks to turn into different species, such as Goron, Zora, Deku, etc. And you can use this to solve puzzles and to traverse the overworld, and it's just very interesting. And while it does share a lot of things from Ocarina of Time, I think it's a significantly better game. Number 3. The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild is one of very few Zelda games to be completely open world, because after you beat the beginning in the Great Plateau, you have free reign and you can do whatever you want. You can beat quests, collect Koroks, or even go straight to Ganon himself. And this is a very interesting and fun mechanic that makes the game fun to replay over and over again, as you always find new things. And while the exploration is very, very fun, the dungeons, the music, as well as the story are not particularly good in this game, which is why it isn't at the top of my list. But overall, it's still a very, very fun game, and if you have a Switch or a Wii U, I would definitely recommend it. And hopefully the sequel to it coming out next year fixes some of the problems, and maybe even the best Zelda game. Number 2. The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess. The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess is one of my favorite Zelda games because of the dungeons, the items, the bosses, the music, the overworld in general, and the art style, as well as the story. It's all really great, and it makes for one of the most solid Zelda experiences. Probably the most solid Zelda experience. If you want a great Zelda game, then you should play Twilight Princess, as it's very good, and it's kind of what you want. If you think of a Zelda game, it's kind of what you would think of. It has, like, the dungeons are some of the best in the series. It has incredible music. It has a really great story. And just in general, it's a great game. Next up, we have honorable mentions. The honorable mentions include Oracle of Seasons, which didn't quite make the cut, as well as The Wind Waker, and Four Swords Adventures, as well as The Legend of Zelda, the original one on the NES, Spirit Tracks for the DS, as well as The Adventure of Link for the NES. Number 1. The Legend of Zelda: Skyward Sword. For all of the great things that Twilight Princess does, Skyward Sword does almost all of them even better. Its dungeons are by far the best in the series. It has amazing items, it's immersive, it has an amazing story, as well as having a very great art style as well. It is beyond what you should expect from a Zelda game. It's a really great game, and It's interesting. It's more of a linear game than most Zelda games, which actually does not take away from the experience at all. And in fact, it actually makes it even more immersive, because you always feel like you're going to the same places, but similarly to a Metroid game, you're in the same place, like regions, but you unlock new places in the region. Overall, this is definitely my favorite Zelda game, and I would definitely recommend it if you have a Wii, a Wii U, or a Nintendo Switch. So what did you think of my rankings? Did you like them? Did you disagree with some of the things? Be sure to tell me in the comments below. And if you like this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you like my content. Thanks for watching Terminal Velocity, and I'll see you again next time. Bye!